March 9, 1945, Tokyo. The night sky trembles with the sound of engines. 279 Boeing B-29 Superfortress bombers approaching the capital. In their homes, civilians clutch ration books and letters never to be sent. Japanese military headquarters believed their air defenses could repel any threat. Their calculations showed confidence. Yet, within hours, 1,665 tons of incendiaries would fall, igniting a firestorm consuming 267,000 buildings, 100,000 lives lost in a single night. The generals had dismissed American bombers as distant, manageable threats. Now, standing in their command centers, they watched their capital burn with an intensity that exceeded every prediction. This raid would inflict more devastation than the atomic bombing of Nagasaki 5 months later. The question haunting every Japanese officer: how had American industrial power grown so overwhelmingly vast? And could Japan possibly survive this relentless onslaught? The Imperial Japanese Army headquarters in Tokyo maintained detailed defense projections throughout 1944. Senior staff officers reviewed intelligence reports about American bomber development with measured confidence. Their interceptor aircraft, including the Mitsubishi J-2M Raiden and the Kawasaki Ki-61 Hien, had proven effective against earlier Allied raids. The distances involved seemed prohibitive. American B-17 Flying Fortress bombers, while formidable in Europe, lacked the range to strike Japanese industrial centers consistently from existing Pacific bases. Japanese military doctrine emphasized homeland defense through layered protection. Coastal observation posts, radar installations, fighter squadrons, and anti-aircraft batteries formed an integrated system. Intelligence analysts calculated that sustained strategic bombing campaigns required bases within 1,500 miles of target areas. The vast Pacific Ocean appeared to provide natural protection. Even after American forces captured islands in the Marianas during summer 1944, Japanese planners believed their defensive preparations would prove adequate. What Japanese intelligence failed to grasp was the revolutionary nature of Boeing's B-29 development program. While Japanese analysts examined specifications of existing American bombers, Boeing engineers had created something unprecedented. The B-29 Superfortress featured a pressurized cabin allowing operations above 30,000 feet. Far beyond the effective ceiling of most Japanese interceptors. Its 4 Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engines generated 2,200 horsepower each, providing a combat radius exceeding 1,500 miles. The bomb bay could accommodate 20,000 pounds of ordnance. By December 1944, American factories were producing B-29 bombers at a rate exceeding 300 per month. Japanese aircraft production, hampered by resource shortages and dispersed manufacturing, managed barely 100 fighters monthly. This production disparity would prove decisive. Japanese generals believed they faced a manageable threat. The numbers told a different story, one of inevitable industrial supremacy that would reshape the Pacific War's final months. The first B-29 overflights of Japanese territory occurred in November 1944. Initial raids targeted aircraft factories and military installations. Damage proved moderate, reinforcing Japanese confidence in their defensive capabilities. Staff officers noted interceptor successes and anti-aircraft effectiveness in their reports. What they failed to recognize was that American strategists were still refining their tactics, learning optimal bombing altitudes and formation patterns. The true campaign had not yet begun. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress emerged from urgent requirements established by the United States Army Air Corps in 1940. Military planners, observing European warfare developments, recognized the need for a very long-range heavy bomber capable of striking targets across vast oceanic distances. Boeing's design team, led by Chief Engineer Edward Curtis Wells, created an aircraft that pushed every existing boundary of aeronautical engineering. Construction of the B-29 required innovations in metallurgy, engines, pressurization systems, and remote-controlled defensive armament. The aircraft's empty weight exceeded 74,000 pounds, heavier than most bombers fully loaded. Its wingspan stretched 141 feet. The pressurized cabin allowed crews to operate at altitudes above 30,000 feet without oxygen masks, a revolutionary feature providing protection from most anti-aircraft fire and interceptors. The bomber's defensive armament included 12 Browning M2 50-caliber machine guns and 1 M2 20mm cannon, all coordinated through a General Electric central fire control system. Gunners operated remotely from sighting stations, with ballistic computers automatically adjusting for target speed, altitude, and distance. This technological integration represented a quantum leap beyond conventional bombers. Boeing's Wichita Kansas facility began B-29 production in 1943. Additional manufacturing plants opened in Renton, Washington, Marietta, Georgia, and Omaha, Nebraska. By war's end, these facilities would produce 3,970 B-29 bombers, a production achievement unmatched by any other heavy bomber program. Each aircraft required approximately 55,000 labor hours to complete, yet American industrial capacity sustained this enormous output while simultaneously producing fighters, transport aircraft, and other military equipment. The B-29's combat debut occurred in June 1944. When aircraft from the 20th Bomber Command struck railway facilities in Bangkok, Thailand. Initial operations revealed mechanical problems, particularly with the Wright R-3350 engines that tended to overheat. Engineers implemented modifications, improving engine cooling and reliability. By autumn 1944, B-29s began arriving at newly constructed airfields in the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, positioning them within striking distance of the Japanese home islands. Each B-29 cost approximately $639,000 to manufacture. Expensive by wartime standards, but justified by its strategic capabilities, American factories produced these sophisticated bombers faster than Japanese forces could manufacture simple fighters. The production comparison revealed fundamental differences in industrial capacity. United States aircraft factories employed over 2 million workers by 1944, while Japanese aircraft production relied on fewer than 500,000 workers, operating with limited raw materials and increasingly disrupted supply chains. Japanese military leadership reviewed initial B-29 raid reports with careful attention but limited concern. The first strike against Tokyo, launched on November 24, 1944, involved 111 B-29 bombers targeting the Musashi Aircraft Engine Factory. Cloud cover obscured the target area. Only 24 bombers dropped ordnance on the primary objective. Damage proved minimal. Japanese interceptors and anti-aircraft batteries claimed 7 B-29s destroyed, with actual American losses totaling 2 aircraft. Defense Minister General Sugiyama Hajime reviewed the engagement reports with measured satisfaction. Japanese interceptors had engaged the American formation successfully. Anti-aircraft batteries had forced bombers to alter their approach patterns. The raids appeared manageable within existing defensive frameworks. What Sugiyama and other senior officers failed to recognize was that American bomber crews were still developing optimal tactics for high-altitude precision bombing against Japanese targets. Japanese fighter tactics emphasized aggressive frontal attacks against bomber formations. Pilots flying Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters, Nakajima Ki-44 Shoki interceptors, and other aircraft types demonstrated courage and skill. However, the B-29's defensive armament, remote-controlled turrets, and high operational altitude presented unprecedented challenges. Japanese interceptors designed for Pacific combat against earlier American aircraft lacked the high-altitude performance necessary to engage B-29 formations effectively above 28,000 feet. Anti-aircraft defenses around major Japanese cities included 88mm and 120mm guns, along with searchlight batteries and barrage balloon installations. These weapons proved effective against aircraft operating below 20,000 feet. B-29 formations flying above 30,000 feet remained largely beyond effective anti-aircraft range. Japanese gunners fired thousands of shells with minimal impact on the high-flying American bombers. Japanese military production priorities emphasized fighter aircraft over bomber development. The Nakajima Kika jet-powered fighter entered late-stage development by 1945, but chronic fuel shortages and materials scarcity prevented meaningful production. Japanese engineers understood high-altitude interception requirements, but lacked resources to implement solutions at scale. Meanwhile, American B-29 production accelerated monthly. By December 1944, Japanese defense planners recognized a troubling pattern. American bombing raids occurred with increasing frequency. Each raid involved larger formations. Damage assessments showed steady deterioration of Japanese industrial capacity. Yet, senior military leadership continued to express confidence publicly. Internal documents revealed growing concern among junior officers who directly observed American air superiority. The gap between official optimism and operational reality widened with each passing week. The first B-29 strike against Tokyo marked the beginning of a campaign that would ultimately devastate Japan's industrial infrastructure. Brigadier General Emmett Rosie O'Donnell led 111 superfortresses from Saipan, covering a distance of 1,500 miles to reach the target area. Weather conditions over Tokyo included heavy cloud cover at target altitude, Bombardiers struggled to identify the Musashi aircraft engine factory through the cloud layers. American air crews faced multiple challenges during this initial raid. The distance from Saipan to Tokyo required careful fuel management. Crews operated at the edge of the B-29's combat radius. Navigation over open ocean tested even experienced pilots. Japanese fighter opposition proved more determined than anticipated. Zero fighters and newer interceptor types attacked the bomber formation aggressively, exploiting gaps in defensive coverage. Post-mission analysis revealed significant lessons. High-altitude precision bombing through cloud cover achieved limited results. Only 48 bombs struck within 1,000 feet of the target aim point. The Musashi factory suffered minor damage, with production disrupted for less than 1 week. However, the raid demonstrated that American bombers could reach Tokyo, strike industrial targets, and return to base. A strategic reality that Japanese planners could no longer dismiss. Firestown Bomber Command, under Major General Haywood S. Hansel, evaluated the mission results carefully. Hansel advocated precision bombing doctrine, targeting specific industrial facilities to maximize strategic impact while minimizing civilian casualties. This approach required clear weather conditions and accurate navigation. Japanese weather patterns included frequent cloud cover over urban areas, particularly during winter months. Precision bombing under these conditions proved frustratingly difficult. American losses from the November 24th raid totaled 2 B-29s, 1 to mechanical failure, 1 to fighter attack. Japanese claims of 7 bombers destroyed significantly exceeded actual losses, a pattern that would repeat throughout the campaign. Accurate assessment of air combat results proved difficult for both sides. Pilots and gunners reported probable kills in good faith, but confirmation required more than visual observation of damaged aircraft. Subsequent raids during December 1944 followed similar patterns. Bomber formations struck Japanese targets with moderate effectiveness. Weather conditions limited precision bombing opportunities. Damage remained insufficient to significantly disrupt Japanese war production. American strategists recognized the need for tactical revision. The answer would emerge from an unconventional officer willing to abandon precision bombing doctrine in favor of a more devastating approach. Major General Curtis E. LeMay assumed command of the 15th Panhan Bomber Command in January 1945. LeMay brought extensive strategic bombing experience from European operations, where he had developed innovative formation tactics and bombing techniques. Upon reviewing the Pacific campaign's limited results, LeMay recognized that precision bombing against Japanese targets required tactical reconsideration. Japanese cities presented unique vulnerabilities that European targets lacked. Traditional European cities featured stone and brick construction that resisted fire. Japanese urban areas consisted primarily of wooden structures with paper screens, built densely in traditional neighborhoods. These construction patterns created ideal conditions for area firebombing. American strategists had long understood this vulnerability, having developed the M69 incendiary bomb specifically for use against Japanese targets. The M69 incendiary consisted of a hexagonal steel tube filled with napalm gel, a mixture of gasoline and chemical thickening agents. Upon impact, the bomb's tail fins separated, igniting a fuse that detonated the main charge. Burning napalm gel scattered across a wide area, clinging to surfaces and igniting wooden structures. Each M69 weighed 6 pounds. Bombers carried them in clusters called E-46 assemblies, with each cluster containing 38 individual bomblets. A single B-29 could carry 40 such clusters, 1,520 individual incendiary bombs per aircraft. LeMay reviewed weather data, target analysis, and previous mission results. He concluded that precision bombing could not achieve decisive strategic results under existing conditions. Area bombing with incendiaries offered an alternative approach, one that abandoned precision targeting in favor of destroying entire industrial neighborhoods. This tactical shift would generate enormous casualties among civilian workers in targeted areas. LeMay understood the moral implications, but prioritized ending the war quickly. On February 25, 1945, LeMay authorized the first major incendiary raid against Tokyo. 172 B-29s dropped incendiary clusters on a 1-square-mile target area near the Tokyo waterfront. The resulting fires destroyed approximately 28,000 buildings and killed an estimated 1,000 civilians. Damage exceeded all previous raids combined. LeMay had found his method. American firebombing tactics drew from British Royal Air Force experience over Germany. However, the effectiveness against Japanese cities far exceeded European results. British area bombing of Hamburg in July 1943 created devastating firestorms but required multiple waves over several nights. LeMay's Tokyo raid achieved comparable destruction with a single strike. demonstrating the unique vulnerability of Japanese urban construction to incendiary attack. The night of March 9th through 10th, 1945, marked the culmination of LeMay's tactical revolution. 279 B-29 Superfortresses departed Mariana Island bases, carrying 1,665 tons of incendiary bombs. Unlike previous high-altitude raids, LeMay ordered crews to attack from 5,000 to 7,000 feet, low altitude that increased bombing accuracy, while exposing aircraft to greater risk from anti-aircraft fire and fighter interception. LeMay's tactical modifications extended beyond altitude selection. He ordered bombers stripped of most defensive armament and ammunition, reducing weight to allow maximum incendiary bomb loads and improved fuel efficiency. Crews flew individually rather than in defensive formations, arriving over Tokyo at staggered intervals throughout the night. The first wave dropped bombs in a massive X pattern marking target boundaries. Subsequent waves bombed within these markers, ensuring concentrated coverage of the target area. The targeted district, Shitamachi, comprised 16 square miles of densely packed residential and industrial neighborhoods in eastern Tokyo. Wooden houses, small workshops, and cottage industries filled narrow streets. Approximately 1 million people lived in the target zone. Wind conditions on the night of March 9th included strong gusts from the northwest, conditions that would prove catastrophic once fires began spreading. The first incendiaries fell at 12:08 a.m. local time on March 10th. Within minutes, hundreds of individual fires ignited across the target area. As more bombers arrived and released their payloads, fires merged into larger conflagrations. The strong winds spread flames rapidly from building to building. By 1 a.m., separate fires had combined into a massive firestorm, a self-sustaining inferno generating winds exceeding 100 miles per hour that sucked oxygen from surrounding areas and created temperatures exceeding 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Japanese firefighting capabilities proved utterly inadequate for a disaster of this magnitude. Tokyo's fire department possessed limited equipment, reduced by wartime resource shortages. Fire crews attempting to combat the flames found water pressure insufficient as mains ruptured from heat. Many firefighters died attempting to control fires in their districts. Civilians fled burning neighborhoods, only to encounter walls of flame blocking escape routes. Thousands sought refuge in rivers and canals, where many drowned or died from smoke inhalation. The raid continued for approximately 3 hours. American bomber crews reported seeing flames visible from more than 150 miles away. By dawn, the firestorm had burned itself out, having consumed nearly everything combustible within the target area. Tokyo Metropolitan Police reports documented 267,171 buildings destroyed, approximately 1/4 of Tokyo's structures. Casualty estimates varied, with official figures eventually settling around 100,000 dead and 1 million homeless. Japanese military leadership confronted devastating reality after the March 10th Tokyo firestorm. Similar raids struck Nagoya on March 11th, Osaka on March 13th, and Kobe on March 16th. American bombers operated with near impunity. Japanese fighter pilots flew interception missions with determination, but losses mounted steadily. Experienced pilots died faster than training programs could replace them. Fuel shortages grounded capable aircraft. Anti-aircraft ammunition stocks dwindled. Commander Minoru Genda, one of Japan's most experienced naval aviation officers, submitted a classified assessment to Naval General Staff Headquarters in early April. His report stated bluntly, "Our air defense capabilities have effectively collapsed. We lack sufficient fuel to maintain training standards. We lack pilots with adequate experience to engage B-29 formations effectively. We lack aircraft capable of high-altitude interception. Most critically, we lack the industrial capacity to reverse any of these deficiencies while sustaining current operational losses." Genda's analysis highlighted production disparities that had become impossible to ignore. During March 1945, Japanese aircraft factories produced approximately 250 fighters despite enormous effort and resource diversion. American factories during the same month produced more than 3,000 combat aircraft of all types, including over 300 B-29 bombers. For every Japanese fighter that entered service, American industry produced 12 aircraft. This ratio made sustained air defense mathematically impossible. Japanese fighter pilots during spring 1945 faced impossible odds. A typical B-29 formation included 300 bombers, protected by 48 escort fighters, North American P-51 Mustangs, with performance exceeding any Japanese fighter. Japanese interceptor units might sortie 30 aircraft against such formations. The numerical disparity alone guaranteed defensive failure, even without considering American advantages in pilot training, fuel quality, and aircraft performance. The Imperial Japanese Army Air Service maintained approximately 1,800 operational fighters in April 1945. This figure included all aircraft types in all theaters: China, Southeast Asia, and homeland defense. Serviceability rates remained low due to spare parts shortages and maintenance difficulties. On any given day, fewer than 400 fighters could be readied for homeland defense missions. Against this force, American planners could commit 500 B-29 bombers supported by hundreds of escort fighters, with reserves available to replace losses indefinitely. Japanese pilots developed desperate tactics, attempting to counter B-29 raids. Some resorted to ramming attacks, deliberately colliding with bombers after exhausting ammunition. These suicidal tactics achieved minimal results while accelerating pilot losses. Official encouragement of such methods reflected Japanese military leadership's recognition that conventional interception had failed. Yet even ramming attacks could not meaningfully reduce the scale of American bomber formations appearing daily over Japanese cities. American strategic bombing campaign objectives extended beyond physical destruction. Planners aimed to cripple Japan's war economy by destroying manufacturing capacity, disrupting transportation networks, and severing supply chains connecting raw materials to finished weapons production. By spring 1945, this economic warfare strategy had achieved devastating effectiveness. Japanese aircraft production peaked in September 1944 at approximately 2,000 units. By March 1945, production had declined to approximately 1,500 units monthly. By June, output fell below 800 aircraft per month, a collapse of 60% from peak capacity in just 9 months. Aluminum shortages forced manufacturers to substitute wood and fabric in fighter aircraft construction, reducing performance and survivability. Engine production bottlenecks limited completed airframes to those for which power plants existed. Similar patterns affected other military production sectors. Tank production declined from approximately 300 units monthly in late 1944 to fewer than 100 by June 1945. Naval construction ceased entirely as shipyards sustained repeated bombing damage and raw material supplies vanished. Artillery production dropped 70%. Small arms ammunition output fell by half. The Japanese war economy was collapsing under sustained air attack, combined with naval blockade cutting imported resources. Transportation infrastructure damage created cascading failures throughout the economy. B-29 raids targeted railway yards, bridges, and marshalling centers with systematic precision. By May 1945, Japanese railways operated at approximately 35% of pre-war capacity. Coal shipments from Kyushu to industrial centers on Honshu declined by 80%. Without coal, steel mills reduced operations. Without steel, all manufacturing sectors suffered. The economic system entered a death spiral from which recovery proved impossible during wartime. Japanese civilian morale eroded under bombing pressure and resource shortages. Government rice rations fell to barely subsistence levels. Clothing became unobtainable. Medical supplies vanished from civilian markets. Black market prices soared beyond ordinary workers' means. Urban residents evacuated cities when possible, moving to rural areas where food might be available. This population dispersal further disrupted industrial production as workers abandoned factory jobs. American intelligence analysts monitoring Japanese industrial output recognized these trends clearly. Strategic bombing had achieved its primary objective: destruction of Japan's capacity to sustain modern warfare. Post-war analysis would reveal that Japanese war production peaked in mid-1944 and declined steadily thereafter. By August 1945, production levels had fallen to approximately 40% of the previous year's output. The economic foundations supporting Japanese military resistance had crumbled under the weight of American industrial air power. May 24, 1945, brought another massive incendiary raid to Tokyo, the largest single strike of the Pacific War. 529 B-29 Superfortresses participated, dropping 3,646 tons of incendiary bombs on southern Tokyo districts that had escaped previous raid damage. The target area included government buildings, communications facilities, and remaining industrial plants still operating within the capital. This raid demonstrated the overwhelming scale of American air power. By mid-1945, over 500 heavy bombers striking a single target in coordinated waves represented industrial and logistical capability beyond Japanese capacity to comprehend. Each bomber required fuel, bombs, spare parts, and 10 crew members. This single raid consumed approximately 2 million gallons of aviation gasoline, utilized over 15,000 tons of bombs, and involved 5,290 aircrew personnel. American supply chains delivered these resources across 7,000 miles of ocean to support operations, a feat of logistics unprecedented in military history. Japanese defense response to the May 24th raid proved tragically ineffective. Fewer than 50 fighters intercepted the bomber formations. Anti-aircraft fire remained sporadic and inaccurate. American losses totaled 17 B-29s, a 3.2%. Loss rate considered acceptable by strategic bombing standards. Japanese claims of 69 bombers destroyed bore no relation to actual losses, reflecting the desperation and confusion affecting Japanese military reporting. The raid's physical impact matched previous firestorm attacks. Approximately 51 square miles of Tokyo burned, an area larger than Manhattan. Property damage estimates exceeded $400 million in 1945 currency values. Over 150,000 buildings were destroyed. The exact death toll remained uncertain, with estimates ranging from 3,500 to 7,000 fatalities. Lower casualties compared to the March 10th raid reflected reduced population density as civilians evacuated the capital following previous attacks. Photographic reconnaissance following the May raid revealed Tokyo's transformation from a thriving metropolis to a devastated ruin. Aerial photographs showed vast areas of complete destruction, miles of charred foundations where neighborhoods had existed. Only concrete buildings remained standing, their interiors gutted by fire. Rivers and canals that had failed to protect civilians during firestorms appeared as dark lines through gray wasteland. Parks and open spaces showed clearly as surviving green spaces amid the devastation. American bomber crews reported reduced defensive opposition during the May 24th raid. Fighter interceptions occurred less frequently. Anti-aircraft fire appeared less intense. Japanese defensive capabilities were clearly exhausted. What remained of Tokyo's air defense forces could mount only token resistance against the overwhelming American bomber streams. The capital's military protection had effectively ceased to exist. Japanese military leadership could no longer deny reality. By early summer 1945, the Supreme Council for the Direction of the War, known as the Big Six, met repeatedly during June to discuss Japan's deteriorating strategic position. Army Chief of Staff General Umezu Yoshijiro presented classified assessments documenting the collapse of defensive capabilities. Naval Chief of Staff Admiral Toyoda Soemu outlined the Imperial Navy's inability to oppose American naval operations. The reports painted a picture of comprehensive military defeat. Aircraft losses had reached catastrophic levels. The Imperial Japanese Army Air Service and Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service combined had lost approximately 10,000 aircraft between January and June 1945. This figure included combat losses, operational accidents, and aircraft destroyed on the ground by bombing raids. Remaining operational aircraft totaled fewer than 1,500 by July, inadequate for any meaningful defensive operations. Fuel shortages had become absolute. Japanese synthetic fuel production facilities had sustained heavy bombing damage. Natural petroleum imports from the Dutch East Indies had ceased, following the American submarine campaign's destruction of Japanese merchant shipping. Aviation fuel stocks by June 1945 totaled approximately 40,000 kiloliters, sufficient for approximately 2 weeks of normal operations. Plans existed to reserve remaining fuel for a massive kamikaze defensive effort should American forces invade the home islands, but even this desperate strategy faced resource constraints. American military planners observed Japanese weakness clearly. Intelligence assessments indicated that Japan retained perhaps 4,000 aircraft of all types, with most being obsolete trainers or obsolescent fighters suitable only for suicide attacks. American forces in the Pacific Theater included approximately 22,000 aircraft, including over 1,000 B-29 bombers. The disparity had grown so vast that meaningful comparison became impossible. Japanese civilian leadership, including Foreign Minister Togo Shigenori, recognized that continuing the war served no rational purpose. However, military leaders insisted that national honor required fighting until the end. The concept of 100 million deaths with honor appeared in official propaganda, suggesting that Japan's entire population should perish rather than accept unconditional surrender. This position reflected traditional military values but ignored practical reality. Japan had lost the capacity to resist effectively. Moderate voices within government circles sought diplomatic channels to negotiate peace terms. These efforts faced opposition from military hardliners who viewed any surrender discussion as treason. The internal political struggle paralyzed decision-making at the highest levels. Meanwhile, American bombers continued their systematic destruction of Japanese cities. By the end of June, 66 urban areas had sustained major firebombing raids. Millions of civilians had lost their homes, industrial production had declined to minimal levels, yet the war continued. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey later concluded that Japan would have surrendered by November 1945, even without atomic bombings or Soviet entry into the war, based solely on conventional strategic bombing and naval blockade effects. This assessment, compiled from extensive post-war interviews with Japanese officials and military leaders, indicated that the cumulative impact of the B-29 campaign had rendered continued resistance impossible. By August 1945, the strategic situation had become absolute. The Soviet Union declared war on Japan on August 8, invading Manchuria with overwhelming force. American bombers continued their raids without interruption. On August 6, a B-29 named Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. On August 9th, another B-29 dropped a second atomic bomb on Nagasaki. These unprecedented weapons accelerated surrender discussions but occurred within the context of a nation already defeated. By conventional strategic bombing, Emperor Hirohito intervened personally to break the governmental deadlock regarding surrender. On August 15, 1945, his radio address announced Japan's acceptance of Allied surrender terms, the first time most Japanese citizens had heard their emperor's voice. The address cited a new and most cruel bomb, but also referenced the general devastation facing Japan. For millions of Japanese civilians who had endured months of firebombing raids, the announcement brought relief mixed with grief and shame. American strategic bombing against Japan ultimately delivered 165,000 tons of conventional explosives between November 1944 and August 1945. The B-29 campaign flew approximately 33,000 sorties, with losses totaling 514 aircraft, a loss rate of approximately 1.5%. Japanese air defenses destroyed some American bombers, but mechanical failures and operational accidents caused most losses. The campaign demonstrated that industrial democracies possessing overwhelming production capacity could sustain strategic bombing campaigns indefinitely against opponents lacking similar resources. Human costs of the strategic bombing campaign remain difficult to calculate precisely. Conservative estimates suggest approximately 300,000 Japanese civilians died directly from air raids, with millions more rendered homeless. Physical destruction included 66 cities substantially damaged, with approximately 40% of urban areas in those cities destroyed. Property damage totaled approximately $15 billion in 1945 currency values, approximately $250 billion in modern terms. The B-29 bombing campaign represented culmination of strategic bombing theory developed during the 1920s and 30s by theorists like Julio Duhay and Billy Mitchell. These theorists argued that air power could win wars independently of ground operations by destroying enemy industrial capacity and breaking civilian morale. The Japan campaign appeared to validate this theory, though post-war analysis revealed complexity, economic blockade, submarine warfare, and cumulative military defeats all contributed to Japan's collapse, alongside strategic bombing. Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, ended the most intensive strategic bombing campaign in history. American forces occupied Japan beginning in late August, with General Douglas MacArthur assuming duties as Supreme Commander for the Allied powers. Occupation authorities immediately began assessing the damage inflicted by 3 years of air operations, culminating in the devastating B-29 campaign. The physical evidence spoke clearly. Tokyo, once a city of 7 million, contained vast empty areas where neighborhoods had burned to foundations. Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe, and other major industrial centers showed similar devastation. Smaller cities that had hosted war industries displayed proportional damage. Only cities deliberately spared from bombing, Kyoto for cultural reasons, several cities reserved as potential atomic bomb targets, remained relatively intact. Industrial capacity surveys revealed the extent of economic destruction. Steel production had fallen to approximately 15% of 1944 levels. Aircraft production had essentially ceased. Shipbuilding facilities lay dormant. Electrical power generation continued at reduced capacity, hampered by coal shortages and transmission system damage. The Japanese economy had regressed to approximately pre-1930 levels of industrial output, 20 years of development erased by 3 years of strategic bombing. The B-29 Superfortress had proven itself the most effective strategic bomber of World War II. Its range, payload capacity, defensive armament, and operational ceiling combined to create a weapon system that Japan could neither match nor effectively counter. American industry produced 3,900 170 B-29 bombers during the war, more than Japan produced aircraft of all types during the same period. This production disparity illustrated fundamental differences in industrial capacity between the combatants. Post-war analysis examined factors contributing to strategic bombing effectiveness. Japan's wooden construction increased fire vulnerability dramatically. Dense urban population concentration maximized casualties from area bombing. Limited air defenses allowed bombers to operate with acceptable loss rates. Geographic isolation prevented dispersal of industry beyond bomber range. Economic blockade prevented replacement of destroyed facilities and equipment. These factors combined to make Japan uniquely vulnerable to the type of campaign that American forces executed. The human cost extended beyond immediate casualties. Millions of Japanese civilians faced homelessness, food shortages, and uncertain futures. Cities required decades to rebuild. Survivors carried memories of firestorms and devastation throughout their lives. The bombing campaign's psychological impact affected Japanese society for generations. Yet the campaign achieved its strategic objective, forcing Japanese surrender without requiring a ground invasion that would have cost millions of additional casualties on both sides. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress represents technological achievement and industrial capacity that characterized American victory in the Pacific War. More than 3 aircraft or weapon system, the B-29 symbolized the transformation of American society into what President Franklin Roosevelt called the arsenal of democracy, an industrial power capable of producing war materials at scales that totalitarian rivals could not match despite their militaristic priorities. American aircraft production during World War II totaled approximately 300,000 units across all types. This figure exceeded combined production of Germany, Japan, Italy, and Britain. The industrial mobilization achieving this output required transformation of American economy from Depression-era stagnation to full-capacity war production. Factories that had produced automobiles converted to bomber assembly. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers. Engineering education expanded dramatically. The social and economic changes initiated by war mobilization permanently altered American society. The strategic bombing campaign against Japan demonstrated capabilities and limitations of air power. Advocates claimed that strategic bombing alone could force enemy surrender without ground operations. The Japan campaign appeared to support this thesis, though complete analysis revealed that naval blockade, submarine warfare, and cumulative military defeats contributed significantly to Japanese collapse. Nevertheless, the B-29 raids clearly accelerated the war's conclusion, preventing an invasion that casualty estimates suggested might cost 1 million Allied casualties and many more Japanese military and civilian deaths. Modern historians debate the moral implications of strategic bombing campaigns targeting civilian populations. The Tokyo firestorm of March 10, 1945, killed more people than the atomic bombing of Nagasaki. Total civilian casualties from conventional strategic bombing exceeded those from atomic weapons. These facts generate difficult questions about proportionality, military necessity, and acceptable conduct in warfare. No simple answers exist. The bombing campaign occurred within the context of a brutal war initiated by Japanese aggression, pursued through countless atrocities, and sustained beyond rational strategic hope. The legacy of the B-29 campaign influenced post-war military doctrine significantly. Strategic air power became central to American defense policy. The B-29 evolved into the B-50, which led to the B-52 Stratofortress, a bomber that remained in service for over 70 years. The concept of strategic deterrence through overwhelming air power shaped Cold War military planning and continues influencing defense thinking today. The B-29 Superfortress Enola Gay rests in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum's Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center in Chantilly, Virginia. Visitors can observe the aircraft that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, but they also observe a symbol of industrial democracy's capacity to mobilize resources against tyranny. The polished aluminum skin reflects more than engineering excellence. It reflects the determination of free peoples to defend their values against aggression. Japanese generals were indeed shocked by America's endless stream of B-29 bombers over Tokyo. They had underestimated American industrial capacity, misunderstood the revolution in strategic bombing technology, and failed to comprehend how democratic societies could mobilize resources more effectively than authoritarian regimes. The shock they experienced watching their cities burn reflected the fundamental miscalculation that had led Japan into a war it could not win, a war against an opponent possessing industrial power exceeding their capacity to comprehend or resist. The burned foundations of Tokyo's neighborhoods, the silent factories of Osaka and Nagoya, And the empty skies above Japan in August 1945 testified to a truth that military strategists study still. Wars are won not only by courage and sacrifice, but by the industrial capacity to sustain operations indefinitely while opponents exhaust their resources. The B-29 campaign against Japan demonstrated this principle with devastating clarity, ending the Pacific War and shaping the future of military aviation for generations to come. If you value historically accurate military narratives that honor the memory of those who served while documenting the mechanisms of victory, consider supporting channels dedicated to preserving these stories for future generations. The lessons of industrial mobilization, technological innovation, and democratic resilience remain relevant as we face new challenges in an uncertain world.